maybe we should back up to the very beginning. I mean, so I wonder, okay, so what the podcast is about are non-speaking individuals who tend to have apraxia, which is a mind-body disconnect. And those individuals cannot speak with, using their voice. Speaking is a fine motor skill, whereas pointing to letters is a gross motor skill. So spelling to communicate is how many of these individuals communicate, right? And when the first, and with that in mind, I just want to say one quick thing, that often people historically look at people with apraxia or non-speakers, and they think that because they can't speak, they can't think, that they're not in there. They don't presume competence, and none of that is true. These individuals have a hard time controlling their body, right? And so if you can't control your body, people make all sorts of assumptions, and that's been really difficult. And so I think that the subjects in this project who are non-speakers with autism have been up against all sorts of different battles, from people not presuming they're competent, from people doubting their way of communication through spelling to communicate, and then of course it comes out in many cases that these individuals can read minds, have a plethora of other, for lack of better words, spiritual gifts, and the parents and teachers often aren't worried about that either. So it's like there's stigma every which way. And the podcast is kind of a collision of all these stigmas and really trying to break down the stigmas and the truth is people out there in there spelling without any communication, and that many of them even have spiritual gifts,
What is the spiritual gift?
Yeah, so when I first stumbled into this, which we can talk about later if you want, when I first kind of stumbled into this, I thought this was just about telepathy, right? And that there were these individuals and their parents and teachers were claiming they could read minds. And as I started meeting more and more and more of these families, and again, like I said, teachers, it's not limited to just families, one thing that they started telling me was telepathy is the tip of the iceberg. And I didn't know what that meant. What do you mean telepathy is the tip of the iceberg? And it's true, because I think whether or not it's ability to see disease or illness in someone and be able to diagnose it before this person knows that they should be wrong, reading an aura and saying that they can see color around not just animals and humans but plants, being able to speak multiple languages even though you haven't taught them, or playing instruments and knowing music, or being able to access almost any song and having perfect pitch, being able to visit people in dreams, and then I think some of the more just like mind-altering, shocking things for me was how many non-speaking individuals have said that they are able to speak with people from the other side. And so it didn't just start with telepathy or end with telepathy. It's a plethora of things.
So do you think that this is an emerging aspect of human consciousness, or do you think perhaps this is something maybe we had before we were verbal that we've lost, but that lays dormant, like that we don't need it, so like a muscle, it atrophies?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think we all have this it's all part of us, and in the telepathy tapes in episode 5 in particular, we get into animal communication through telepathy, and a story of elephants that knew when someone who was like in charge of their big game preserve had died, and they'd walk days to his house and then kind of stay there for grieving, and then would come back every year on the day of his death. I mean, just unbelievably beautiful stuff. Rich Sheldrake has talked has written at length, a brilliant Cambridge biologist, about
stalled vehicles ahead.
Here, these parents don't know that any other parents are going through this. They think a singular miracle is happening at home, that this child can read their thoughts. And that this is where the story is, that there's so many parents who haven't been listened to. And so I really thought this was about parents at first, and then discovered, no, there's been teachers writing about this for 30 years, capturing it, videotaping this phenomenon going on, and scared to come out about it. And I think same with the families, right? I mean, what a weird thing to say, this child can read my mind, or this child seems to be able to do X, Y, Z, things that seem impossible. And so, my first thought was, okay, I need to see this with my own eyes. And so, Dr. Powell had just been reached out to by a family in Mexico who discovered that their 13-year-old daughter was inside. They didn't think she was. And she was able to aid. And the reason they discovered that,
There are police reported ahead.
that they were in charge of homeschooling, and started being like, okay, let's see what you know. And bing, 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 she started spelling. She knew an awful lot, and they were shocked. And pretty soon thereafter, she said, I can read your mind. And they thought, what? And they would do tests. What did I just draw? And she'd say, what they just drew. What are we thinking? And she would write it. And so,
Do they say what they see? Or how they see it? Like if someone writes something down, do they see the word or do they know it?
well, I think that's a really good question. And, we've done a few experiments that, again, I'm not a scientist. Like the experiments I was doing for the film, I mean, know something, and we don't know how they know it, but they do. They haven't been taught it, they haven't been exposed to it, and that could be thoughts, it could be knowledge about the future, it could be knowledge about language, and it's this is what the whole hope is about the telepathy tapes, right? Is that people start just putting money behind this research, because for so long, research around this type of stuff wouldn't be funded because it would be just dismissed. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible. And one of the moms in our in the telepathy tapes, who I love so much, her name is Manisha. She talks about her son. She goes, "Akil is the data. You want to look at the data. You want the data. Like, look at my son. He's the data."
Right.
And some of these parents are wanting, desperate for answers. It's not, they're not in the question of if it's happening. They're wondering how it's happening. And I think I'm in that part too. Like, when the people that are just, is it possible? Is it possible? I think for most of us in this world, it's like, yeah, you're like 10 steps behind, man. Like, it's possible. It's not a matter of if, it's why. And that's my hope, is that there's like the chains will be like, let off the scientists.
These children that can read things, are they typing it out on an iPad? Are they writing it physically? How do they do it?
Usually, so there's different forms of spelling to communicate. Often there's like a letter board, right? Sometimes it's a stencil letter board that you poke a pencil through, so you really know when you get that letter, and it's really satisfying to get poke through. Sometimes there's just a laminate board where you kind of point to a letter. Some individuals are typing into a spelling kind of app on an iPad, or there's different spelling AAC devices, yeah. And then there's some individuals who end up going to the QWERTY key, the typical keyboard that we all type with on a keyboard. So
there's varying levels of ability in terms of using your body.
Yeah, using your body. And the thing I think why spelling has been so, there's such a stigma around spelling, and I feel so bad for individuals using spelling because they're in there and they are communicating, but people have said, oh, but you need these supports, so these can't be your words, right? Like for a spelling partner, let's say, you have to kind of learn to be a communication partner. You have to learn to really understand like the mind-body disconnect and what's going on with the non-speaker in front of you. And sometimes their hand gets lost in space, so it's going to like pull it and put it back in again. Or sometimes you have to cue them, like, go for it, okay, get that letter, because that will help with their motor planning, right? So those supports are critical, but people will look at those supports and say, oh, well, that must mean they're not typing independently. But to me, that's as wild as saying, oh, you need reading glasses, you can't read. No, that's a support to help you read. You can still read if you have reading glasses, and that's how I think of the communication.
There's still no influence in the words or letters being chosen.
No. And I think one of the things, so the stigma that really started for spelling was facilitated communication. Actually, this is like the first thing you asked. I'm probably full circle. So for a long time, there was just no hope of getting people who weren't verbal non-speakers out. There just wasn't. And then all of a sudden, facilitated communication came along, and it was developed, I think, in Australia, I think. But this was ideas of put some pressure on someone's wrist so they can really feel where they're at in space, right? Like they'll be able to spell. And it was a miracle. I mean, it was all over the news. This was great. And some of the first parents that were using facilitated communication started recording. There's telepathy involved. And this was at Syracuse University in the 90s. Syracuse knew about this and started kind of burying that information.